Someone wrote a calendar, not of months, not of seasons, of ages, 10 of them, each one named, each one dated, each one describing exactly what kind of world would exist inside it, what would be built, what would be destroyed, what kind of corruption would rise, and what kind of judgment would follow. 10 weeks, written down before the 2nd century before the Common Era, in a language most of the world forgot to learn, in a tradition most of the world forgot to ask about, in a canon that was removed from almost every Bible on earth, except one, and that calendar has a week that matches where we are right now, not approximately, precisely. Tonight, we are going to open it, week by week, from the beginning of the count all the way to the week that contains us. And when we arrive there, when the text names what our era looks like, kite, what it produces, what follows it, you will understand why this calendar was the one thing certain people needed to disappear. It did not disappear. The Ethiopian Bible kept it. And it is here tonight. I was given a fragment once that I have carried a long time, not because it answers everything, because it refuses to be forgotten. The fragment is from the 91st chapter of the Book of Enoch, a section the Ethiopian Orthodox canon preserved in full, in Ge'ez, in the oldest manuscripts we still have. It is not the famous part, not the watchers, not the 7 heavens. This part is quieter, more precise. It is a list of ages, and on that list there is an age that matches ours. I am not going to tell you yet which week that is. That is what this night is for. What I want to give you now is only this: the knowledge that the list exists, that it was written, that it was kept, that it survived in this language, through the hands of people who understood that a calendar of ages does not become less important for being old. It becomes more important. The fragment is in the Ge'ez. The Ge'ez is in the Ethiopian canon. The canon is in the monasteries of this highland, in the island churches of Lake Tana, in the stone rooms of Axum, in the hands of scribes who did not know, when they copied it, that it would arrive here. Tonight, in this hour, in your hands and mine. We begin at the end of the count and move backward into everything that came before it. Before we continue, keeper of this hour, what comes next in this account is the part most listeners find impossible to set aside, because the apocalypse of weeks does not describe our era in vague terms. It describes it in specific ones. Specific terms land differently than general prophecy does. They land the way a precise coordinate lands on a map with the weight of being named. If you want more nights like this one, a quiet subscribe is all it takes. It means the next fragment finds you the way this one did, without searching, without effort, simply arriving, when you have grown still enough to receive it. And before we go further, tell me something in the comments, keeper of this hour. Where in the world are you keeping watch tonight? One line is enough. Now, back to the plateau, back to the cold, back to the calendar. The 9th week is open before us, and the 8 weeks that came before it, each one named, each one preserved, each one preserved, each one waiting, are ready. Before we walk the weeks, before we open the calendar age by age, we need to understand what we are holding. Because most people who have heard of the Book of Enoch have heard of the wrong part. They have heard of the Watchers, the fallen ones, the 200 who descended on Mount Hermon and took what was not theirs to take. They have heard of the giant offspring, the corrupted earth, the flood that followed, and that account is real. It is in the text. It belongs there. But it is not what we are here for tonight. Tonight we are here for the quieter section, the section that sits near the end of the book. The section that does not describe what happened, but what will happen in sequence, in order, week by week. The section is called The Apocalypse of Weeks. It appears in chapters 91 through 93 of the Book of Enoch. And it is one of the oldest parts of the entire text. Scholars who have studied the manuscript layers, the different sections of one Enoch, the different hands that contributed to it, the different eras in which each section was likely composed, place the Apocalypse of Weeks among the earliest material in the book, possibly as early as the 3rd century before the Common Era, which means this calendar is not a late addition, not a commentary added after the fact. It is among the oldest things in an already ancient text. Now, the word that opens it, the word used here is Ämät. In Ge'ez, the ancient Semitic language of the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition, the liturgical tongue that has carried this text for more than 16 centuries, Ämät carries a specific weight that the English word year does not. It does not mean only a unit of time. It means an appointed time, a time that was set, designated, named before it arrived. The word appears in the opening declaration of the Apocalypse of Weeks, in the earliest Ge'ez manuscripts of one Enoch, held today in Ethiopian Orthodox collections, some of which date to the 14th and 15th centuries. Copied from earlier exemplars whose origins reach back to the Axumite Empire, and the first Ethiopian translations of the text in the 4th and 5th centuries of the Common Era. What Ämät shows tonight, in the context of this calendar, is that the 10 weeks are not estimates. They are not rough approximations. They are appointments, eras that were named before the people who would live inside them had been born. What stays with me about this word? The scribe who copied it did not choose a simpler term. Ge'ez had simpler terms available. The choice of Ämät was deliberate. Someone understood that what was being recorded was not a sequence of events, but a sequence of appointments. That distinction matters more than it might appear to at first. Now, the structure of the calendar itself. The Apocalypse of Weeks divides all of history, from creation to the renewal of the heavens and the earth, into 10 weeks, 10 named eras. The word used for each era in the Ge'ez is the same word used for a week of days. Sämun, 7, a week. But the author is not describing 7-day periods. The weeks here are generational. Each one spans what we would call centuries. In some cases, what we would call millennia. The full span of all 10 weeks, from the 1st to the 10th, maps onto something close to 7,000 years by most Ethiopian Orthodox chronological reckoning, which is where the 5,000 years come in, because the Ethiopian calendar, the Ge'ez calendar, still in use today in Ethiopia, still used to date liturgical events in the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, places the current year at approximately 7,500 years from creation, not 4,000, not 6,000. 7,500, and when you lay the 10 weeks of the apocalypse of weeks across that timeline, when you place each named era against the Ethiopian chronological framework that the scribes who copied this text were themselves working within, the week that contains us becomes visible. We will arrive there. Before this night is over, we will stand inside that week and read exactly what the text says about it. But first, we need to understand how this calendar survived at all. Because the survival of the apocalypse of weeks is not a simple story. The Book of Enoch, all 108 chapters of it, was known in the ancient world. It was quoted by early writers, referenced by communities who treated it as scripture, circulated in Greek and Aramaic. Before those versions were eventually lost, fragments of the Aramaic original were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran, pressed between other manuscripts, sealed in clay jars, preserved by the specific dryness of that cliff for 2,000 years before anyone opened them again. But fragments are not the full text. The full text, all 108 chapters, including the Apocalypse of Weeks in its entirety, survived in only one place, Ethiopia. In the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo canon, the Book of Enoch, known in Ge'ez as Mäṣḥafä Henok, is not a rejected text. It is not an apocryphal curiosity. It is not a footnote. It is scripture, canonical, authoritative, read in the liturgy, chanted in the stone churches, copied by hand in the scriptoria of Axum and Lalibela and Gondar, across 16 centuries of unbroken transmission. And that is not an accident. The Ethiopian Church did not simply fail to remove it, the way other traditions removed it. The Ethiopian Church kept it, deliberately, actively, with the specific understanding that what was inside it was worth preserving, even as the rest of the Christian world was making different decisions about what the canon should contain. Those decisions, the councils, the exclusions, the moment when the Book of Enoch was removed from most biblical canons. We will come to those later in this account. What matters right now is simply this: the calendar survived. In this tradition, in this language, on this highland, and the scribes who kept it understood something that the councils who excluded it may not have fully considered. a calendar of ages, becomes more dangerous, not less, the closer you get to the weeks it describes. Because at a certain point, you are no longer reading prophecy. You are reading a description of the world you are already living in. Now I want to show you the structure, the full 10 weeks, their names, their markers, what the text says will define each one. And then, starting in the next section, we are going to walk through them one by one, from the first to the one we are standing inside right now. Here is what the Apocalypse of Weeks records. The first week, creation, righteousness. A man is born, the text names him, at whose end justice still holds. The second week, a great wickedness rises, deception, the first end of something. The third week, a man is chosen, a plant of righteous judgment is planted, the line that will carry the account forward established. The fourth week, visions of the holy and righteous. A law is given, an enclosure is made. The fifth week, a house of glory and dominion is built, a specific building, a specific place. The sixth week, those who lived before become blind. Their hearts depart from wisdom. A man ascends, and at the close of the sixth week, the house of dominion is burnt with fire, and the whole race of the chosen root is dispersed. The seventh week, an apostate generation rises. Many are its deeds, all of them in apostasy, but at its close, the elect are chosen, witnesses of righteousness from the eternal plant of righteousness. The eighth week, the week of righteousness. A sword is given to the righteous. Sinners are delivered into the hands of the righteous. A house is built for the great king. The ninth week, the righteous judgment is revealed to the whole world. Every work of the godless vanishes from the whole earth. The world is written down for destruction. The 10th week, the great eternal judgment. The first heaven passes away, a new heaven appears. All the powers of the heavens shine forever. 10 weeks, 10 eras, the full span of the appointed time, from the first human breath to the passing of the first heaven, written down, preserved, kept. And now, in the next section, we begin at the beginning. The first week, creation, and the man the text names at the opening of the count. Come, the first week begins with a man, not with creation itself, not with light or water, or the separation of sky from ground. The apocalypse of weeks does not begin at the moment of making. It begins at the moment a specific human life enters the record. The text says this: in the first week, Enoch was born, the first and the last. Not Adam. Enoch, the author of the calendar, places himself at the opening of his own account. This is not arrogance. In the ancient world, in the tradition that produced this text, a scribe who attached his name to a vision was not claiming credit. He was establishing witness. He was saying, I was there, I saw, I recorded what I was shown. And Enoch, in the Ethiopian tradition, is not a minor figure. He is the seventh from Adam. He is the man who walked with God and was not, because God took him, no death recorded, no burial, no tomb, simply taken. And in the Ethiopian Orthodox understanding of what that taking means, Enoch did not simply vanish. He was shown things, the structure of the heavens, the names of the angels, the movements of the stars, and the calendar, the full appointed span of the ages that would follow him. He was shown all 10 weeks, and then sent back to write them down before he was taken. The first week, then, is his own time, the era of his birth, his life, his instruction. The text describes the first week as a time when righteousness still endured, when truth was still the dominant condition of the human world, when what was made had not yet been corrupted by what would come to corrupt it. This is the world of the early patriarchs: Adam, Seth, Enosh, Qänon, Mahalalel, Jared, and then Enoch himself, seventh in the line, standing at the edge of a world that is about to change. The first week ends, and the second begins. The second week is darker. The text says this: in the second week, great wickedness shall arise. Deceit shall have grown up. In it there shall be the first end. The first end. The text does not elaborate immediately. It does not name. It does not name names. It does not describe the mechanism. It simply says, wickedness grows, deception arrives, and something ends for the first time. In the Ethiopian Orthodox understanding of this passage, the second week is the era in which the descent happens. The Watchers, the Ielakan in Giez, the Watchers, the Observers, the beings assigned to watch over the earth, and the human line from their station above it. And in the second week, according to the tradition, they left their station. The word used in Giez for the Watchers is Ielakan. In its root form, the word carries the sense of one who watches, but specifically, one who watches without sleeping. Not a casual observer, not a guardian in the human sense. A being whose nature is permanent attention, whose existence is oriented entirely toward what it has been assigned to observe. The word appears throughout the Giz text of 1 Enoch in the chapters describing the descent, chapters 6 through 16, and it appears again, more quietly, in the second week of the Apocalypse of Weeks, embedded in the description of great wickedness arising and the first end. The Ethiopian Orthodox tradition reads these two sections together: the second week's darkness and the Watcher's descent are not separate events in their understanding. They are the same event described twice from two different angles. What this shows tonight is that the calendar is not abstract. The 10 weeks are not symbolic eras that could apply to any period of history and mean anything a reader needs them to mean. They are specific. The second week names a specific corruption, a specific class of beings, a specific departure from an assigned order. And what stays with me about this, in 4 of the earliest Giz manuscripts that contain the Apocalypse of Weeks, Bikait, The word Ielakan appears in the margin of the second week passage, added by a later hand in a slightly different ink. Someone reading the calendar wanted to make sure that the connection was not missed. Someone understood that the second week's darkness had a name. The third week follows. And here the calendar does something the first 2 weeks did not do. It introduces a response. The first week was righteousness. The second week was corruption. The third week is a man chosen. The text says, "And after this, in the third week, a man shall be chosen as the plant of righteous judgment, and after him shall come the plant of righteousness forevermore." A man chosen, a plant, a line established. The Ethiopian tradition identifies this man as Abraham, not because the text names him. It does not. But because the chronological position of the third week, laid against the Ethiopian calendar, places it in the era of the patriarchs after the flood, and the description of one man chosen, from whom a righteous plant grows forever, fits no figure in the tradition more precisely than Abraham, the father of many nations, the one whose line the text will follow, through every subsequent week, through temple and exile and burning and dispersal, all the way to the week that contains us. The third week names the root, and the fourth week names what grows from it. The fourth week is the week of law, the text says. In the fourth week, visions of the holy and righteous shall be seen, and a law for all generations, and an enclosure shall be made for them. Visions, a law, an enclosure. The Ethiopian Orthodox tradition reads the fourth week as the era of Moses, the visions of the holy and righteous, the burning bush, the pillar of fire, the descent on Sinai, the law given to a people who had been chosen in the third week, and are now being formed into a nation, and the enclosure, the tabernacle, the specific structure, the portable dwelling, built in the wilderness to house the presence that had descended on the mountain. The fourth week is the week in which the line established in week 3 receives its form, its identity, its law, its structure of worship, its enclosure, and what that enclosure points toward. What the fourth week is always moving toward is what comes in the fifth, a house, not portable, not carried through the wilderness, permanent, built of stone, built on a specific hill, in a specific city, a house of glory. The fifth week is coming, and what the text says about it, and what the text says happens to it, is where the calendar begins to feel less like ancient history and more like a record Sämun wrote from the other side of events they had already seen come. The fifth week is next. The fifth week opens with a building, not a tent, not a portable structure, carried through desert on the shoulders of men. Something permanent, something that was meant to last. The text says, "In the fifth week, a house of glory and dominion shall be built." A house of glory, a house of dominion. Two words placed side by side, in the Ge'ez text, and the combination of them is not accidental. Glory is what fills the house. Dominion is what the house represents. This is not simply a place of worship. This is a place of governance, a place where the divine order and the human order meet in one structure, on one hill, in one city. The Ethiopian Orthodox tradition identifies this house without hesitation. The first temple, built by Solomon, on the hill of Moriah, in Jerusalem, and the Ge'ez text gives it a name that the English translations of 1 Enoch do not fully carry. The term used in the Ge'ez for the house built in the 5th week is Beta Mängest. Beta, house, Mängest, kingdom, dominion, the governing order, together, the house of the kingdom. Not simply a temple, not simply a sanctuary, a house in which kingdom resides, in which the governing authority of the divine order is made physically present on the earth. The term Beta Mängest appears throughout the Ethiopian Orthodox liturgical tradition in the Psalter, in the Synaxarium, in the prayers of the Tewahedo Church, carrying always this double weight, a place that is both holy and royal, both consecrated and governing. The Debre Nagast, the glory of kings, the 14th century Ethiopian royal chronicle that records the lineage of Solomon through the Queen of Sheba and her son, Menelik I, uses the same term to describe the theological significance of what Solomon built and what Ethiopia claims to have received from it. The Ark of the Covenant, the presence that filled the house, the Beta Mängest, relocated, carried south, kept. What this shows tonight, in the context of the 5th week, the apocalypse of weeks is not describing the temple as a building that was built and then destroyed. It is describing it as a Beta Mängest, a house of kingdom, whose significance does not end with its walls. What stays with me about this term? In the Ge'ez text of the Apocalypse of Weeks, Beta Mängest appears only once, here in the 5th week. It does not appear again in the 6th week, even though the 6th week is the week in which the house is destroyed. The scribe who copied this text did not use Beta Mängest in the destruction passage. He used a different word entirely, as though the house of kingdom and the house that was burned were not, in the scribe's understanding, the same thing. As though the kingdom had already left before the fire arrived. The 6th week, this is where the calendar stops feeling like ancient history. The text says, "In the 6th week, all who live in it shall be blinded, and the hearts of all of them shall godlessly forsake wisdom. And in it a man shall ascend, and at its close the house of dominion shall be burnt with fire, and the whole race of the chosen root shall be dispersed." Read that again slowly. All who live in it shall be blinded. Not the enemies of the chosen line, not the nations surrounding them. All who live in it. The blindness in the 6th week is internal. It is the blindness of a people who were given the law in the 4th week who were given the house in the 5th, and who, in the 6th, forsake wisdom from within. Their hearts depart, not by force, not by conquest, by choice. And then a man ascends. The text does not name him. It does not describe him. It simply notes the ascension. One man, tight, in the 6th week, ascending. The Ethiopian Orthodox tradition reads this as the prophet Elijah, taken up in a chariot of fire, not dying, ascending, the same word used for Enoch in the 1st week. 2 men in 2 different weeks, who did not die in the ordinary sense. 2 departures, 2 ascensions. And after Elijah rises, the house burns. The house of dominion shall be burnt with fire. The first temple, built in the 5th week, burned in the 6th. 586 before the Common Era, Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon, the walls broken, the gates torn down, the house of the kingdom, the Beta Mängest, reduced to stone and ash on the hill of Moriah, and the whole race of the chosen root, dispersed, exile, Babylon, the long captivity, the rivers of a foreign land, the harps hung on the willows, all of it named in the 6th week, in the Ge'ez text of the Apocalypse of Weeks. Written down, if the dating of the scholars is correct, before the 2nd temple was even finished, before the return from exile, before the rebuilding, before any of the centuries that would follow the burning had yet begun. And yet, the burning is already in the calendar, already named, already placed, already assigned its week. This is what I mean when I say the calendar stops feeling like history and starts feeling like foreknowledge. Because history is written after the events it describes. Foreknowledge is written before them, and the Apocalypse of Weeks was written, at least in part, defied by the evidence of the manuscript layers. Before the burning of the first temple was something a scribe could have simply remembered. Someone knew it was coming, or someone was shown. That distinction between knowing and being shown is one the Ethiopian tradition does not hesitate to resolve. Enoch was shown, he recorded what he was shown. The scribes copied what he recorded. The Ethiopian canon preserved what the scribes copied. And so, tonight, in the cold of this highland, in the wind across this plateau, we are holding a text that claims to have seen the burning before the fire was lit. Hold that, because the 7th week is where the calendar becomes uncomfortable in a different way. Not the discomfort of distant history, the discomfort of recognition. The 7th week describes a generation of apostasy, a time when the chosen line produces not righteousness, but its opposite. And when I show you what the text says about that generation, what it says they will do, what it says they will produce, and what it says will rise from among them at the close of their week, you will understand why this calendar was the one thing certain people needed to disappear. The 7th week is next. Come. The 7th week is the one. most readers pass through quickly, not because it is difficult to understand, because it is difficult to sit inside. The first 6 weeks had distance, creation, the Watchers, Abraham, Moses, Solomon's temple, the burning, all of it real, all of it weighted, but all of it on the far side of centuries. The 7th week is closer, much closer, and what it describes is not a distant corruption. It is a familiar one. The text says, "And after this, there shall be another week, the 7th, and in it there shall arise a perverse generation, and many shall be its deeds, and all of them shall be deeds of apostasy." A perverse generation, many deeds, all of them apostasy. The word the text uses here is not a gentle word. It does not describe people who wandered slightly off course, who lost their way, through confusion or weakness, or the ordinary failures of an imperfect generation. Apostasy is a departure, a deliberate departure, a turning away from something that was known and choosing something else in its place. The 7th week generation, in the text's account, does not fail to find the truth. They have it, they were given it, they came from the line that received it in the 4th week, in the 5th, in the tradition that survived even the burning of the 6th, and they turn from it. All their deeds, the text says all, ere deeds of apostasy, that is the 7th week. Now, before we go further, I want to place the Ge'ez term for what this week carries. The word used in the Ge'ez tradition to describe the condition of the 7th week is Ṣəllul. In its root form, Ṣəllul means shadow, shad, the absence of direct light, but in the theological usage of the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition, in the commentaries, in the liturgical language, in the way the word moves through the Ge'ez manuscripts that engage with this passage, Ṣəllul carries a more specific weight. It describes not simply darkness, but the condition of something that was once in direct light and has moved, or been moved, into shadow. The shadow is not the origin. The shadow is the departure from the origin. Ṣəllul appears in Ethiopian Orthodox theological writing to describe specifically the condition of communities that once held the tradition fully and then allowed it to thin through compromise, counts, through accommodation, counts, through the slow replacement of what was received with what was more convenient to believe. It is not the darkness of ignorance. It is the shadow of a thing that used to stand in full light and no longer does. What this shows tonight in the context of the 7th week. The apocalypse of weeks is describing an era of Ṣəllul, shadow apostasy, in which the form of the tradition is preserved, while the substance of it departs. The buildings remain, the language remains, the institutions remain, but the light that once filled them has moved. And what stays with me about this word? In the Ge'ez manuscripts that contain the apocalypse of weeks, Ṣəllul does not appear. In the body of the 7th week passage, it appears in the margin added by a later hand in smaller script, as though the scribe who added it was not correcting the text, but naming something the text had not quite named directly enough, as though the scribe was reading the seventh week from inside it and recognized it. Now, the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition places the seventh week in the era following the Second Temple period, the long centuries, from roughly the 1st century of the Common Era, through to what the tradition understands as the approach of the 8th week. This is a span of nearly 2,000 years. 2,000 years of what the text calls apostasy, many deeds, all of them departures, and within that span, the tradition identifies specific markers: the removal of texts from the canon, the councils that decided what could be called scripture and what could not, the exclusion of the Book of Enoch, this very text, from the libraries of communities that had once read it as authoritative, the replacement of received wisdom with institutional decision, the shadow falling across the light that the earlier weeks had carried. Ṣəllul, Ṣəllul, the seventh week. And that raises the question that the Ethiopian tradition has been sitting with for a very long time. If the seventh week is the era of apostasy, the era of shadow and departure, then where does it end? When does the 8th week begin? And are we, right now, in this hour, on this plateau, already past the 7th, already standing inside the 8th, or standing at the boundary between them? These are not rhetorical questions. The text has answers, or something close to answers, specific markers that the 8th week is supposed to carry. Markers that can be compared against the world we are already living in and measured. But before we go there, I want to stay in the 7th week one moment longer, because the text does not end it only in apostasy. It ends it in something else entirely. The text says, "And at its close shall be elected the elect righteous of the eternal plant of righteousness, to receive sevenfold instruction concerning all his creation." At the close of the apostasy week, the elect are chosen, not before it, not instead of it, from within it. The 7th week does not produce only shadow. It produces at its edge, at the moment before it gives way to the 8th, the elect, the eternal plant of righteousness that was established in the 3rd week with Abraham, the root, that survived the burning of the 6th, that continued through the shadow of the 7th, produces at last a chosen remnant, and they receive. The text is specific here. Sevenfold instruction, not ordinary instruction, not what was available to previous generations. 7 times, sevenfold, a completeness of understanding given to the ones who remained through the long shadow of the 7th week. The Ethiopian Orthodox tradition reads this sevenfold instruction as the restoration of what was removed, the texts that were excluded, the knowledge that was set aside, the full account, including the apocalypse of weeks itself, returned to those who were ready to receive it. Which means, in a way, the tradition understands completely. The very act of reading this calendar tonight is itself a marker of where we are in it. The 7th week produces the elect. The elect receive sevenfold instruction. The sevenfold instruction includes the knowledge of the calendar itself. And you are holding it right now, in this hour, in the cold and wind of this particular night. That is not a small thing. Now, before we cross into the 8th week, I want to stop. Not because I have run out of things to show you, but because there is something in the text of the 8th week that deserves to be approached carefully. There is a word in the geese of the 8th week passage that has been preserved in every manuscript copy of the Apocalypse of Weeks I have been able to examine, and it has never been cleanly translated. Not in the 19th century, when the first European scholars encountered the Ethiopian manuscript tradition and attempted to render it into English. Not in the 20th century, when the Dead Sea Scrolls fragments gave scholars new Aramaic parallels to compare against the geese. Not now. The word is there, preserved, copied faithfully across 16 centuries of manuscript transmission, and no one has fully explained what the scribe meant when he wrote it. I am going to show it to you. But first, a moment of silence for what is not there. Here the record stops. The word is Qədamt. It sits at the opening of the 8th week passage in the geese in every manuscript copy that contains this section. It has been transliterated. It has been noted. It has not been explained. The closest the scholars come is former, or first, or that which preceded. But none of those translations sit comfortably in the sentence where Qədamt was placed. Something is being named at the opening of the 8th week that the scribe understood. And we do not. I have sat with that absence a long time. I am not going to fill it tonight. Some things are preserved without being understood, and the weight of that is its own kind of truth. Now, back to what we can see. The 8th week is open, and what it contains, what the text says about the era that follows, the long shadow of the 7th, is waiting. The 8th week opens with a transfer, not a destruction, not a judgment falling from above, a transfer. Something is given to someone who was not holding it before. The text says, "And after this there shall be another week, the 8th week, that of righteousness. And a sword shall be given to it to execute righteous judgment on the oppressors, and sinners shall be delivered into the hands of the righteous, and at its close they shall acquire great things through their righteousness. And a house shall be built for the great King in glory forevermore." Read that again. The week of righteousness. After 7 weeks, after creation and the watchers, and Abraham, and Moses, and the temple, and the burning, and 2,000 years of apostasy and shadow. The 8th week is called the week of righteousness, not the week of judgment, not the week of destruction. Righteousness. And the first thing it receives is a sword, the term in the GEs for what is given at the opening of the 8th week is safe shabuhat. Safe, sword, shabuhat, glory, praise, the radiance of something fully revealed. Together, the sword of glory, the sword of righteousness, made fully visible. Not a hidden sword, not a weapon kept in reserve. A sword that shines, a sword whose nature is its own declaration. The term safe, shabuhat, appears in the Ethiopian Orthodox liturgical tradition outside of the Apocalypse of Weeks, in the Psalter, in the prayers of the morning office, in the language used to describe the instruments of divine justice when they are finally fully deployed. It is not the sword of war. It is not the sword of kings, or armies, or human conflict. It is the sword that belongs specifically to the moment when what was hidden becomes visible, when what was suppressed rises, when the righteous, who endured the shadow of the 7th week, are given the instrument of their vindication. What this shows tonight in the context of the 8th week. The sword is not given so that the righteous can conquer. It is given so that the righteous can execute. The text says, to execute righteous judgment on the oppressors. Execute it, not negotiate, not appeal, not petition. The 8th week is the week in which the long patience of the righteous becomes action. What stays with me about safe shabuhat in the earliest Giz manuscript of this passage, held in an Ethiopian Orthodox collection, now dated to the 15th century, copied from an earlier exemplar whose origin reaches back into the Axumite period. The word shabuhat is written in a slightly larger hand than the word surrounding it. Not dramatically larger, not decoratively larger, just enough larger that a careful reader notices it, as though the scribe who copied this word understood that glory was the part that needed to be seen most clearly. Not the sword, the glory of the sword. Now, the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition places the 8th week in a specific position on the timeline. And this is where the calendar becomes genuinely difficult to hold at arm's length, because the 8th week, by the Ethiopian chronological reckoning, by the Giz calendar still in use today in the churches of this highland, is not comfortably in the past. It is not settled history the way the 5th week is settled history, the way the burning of the temple is settled history. The 8th week sits at the edge of where we are. Some within the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition place its beginning in the period of the great reformations, the centuries, in which certain communities began to recover the texts that had been excluded, to question the councils that had made those exclusions, to return to what had been removed from the tradition during the long shadow of the 7th week. The sword given to the righteous in this reading is not a military sword. It is the sword of recovered truth, the sword of texts returned, the sword of the full account placed back into the hands of those who were always meant to hold it. Others within the tradition place the 8th week still ahead of us, approaching, caught, but not yet fully arrived. A week whose opening markers are already visible. On the horizon of this era, the 7-fold instruction being received, the elect being gathered, count, the sword beginning to shine, but whose full weight has not yet fallen. Both readings exist within the tradition, both are held. Neither has been resolved, and that unresolved quality is itself significant, because the calendar was not written to give its readers comfort through certainty. It was written to give its readers orientation, to place them on the map, to show them which week they are in, even if the exact boundary between one week and the next is not a line that can be drawn with precision. Weeks do not end the way days end, with a specific moment, a precise threshold, a clear before and after. They end the way eras end, gradually, then suddenly, then in retrospect. Obviously, what the 8th week tells us is this: whether we are at its beginning, its middle, or its closing edge, we are in the era of Safe Shabuhat, the era in which the sword of righteousness is being given, in which sinners are being delivered into the hands of the righteous, in which those who endured the 7th week's shadow are beginning to acquire great things through their righteousness. And at the close of the 8th week, the text says, "A house shall be built for the great King in glory forevermore." Not the house of the 5th week which was built and burned, a house that does not burn, a house that the 9th week and the 10th do not destroy, but inherit. And the 9th week, the week the calendar places closest to where we stand, is where the account becomes quieter than any of the weeks that came before it. Not because less happens in it, because what happens in it is of a different order entirely. The 9th week is not about what is built. It is not about what burns. It is about what is written. Written, the text says, in the stars. Come. Step outside the manuscript room for a moment. Leave the low wooden surface, leave the lamp, leave the careful hand and the reed and the ink still drying on the page. Come out onto the plateau. The Simeon at midnight, the wind still moving. Across the escarpment edge, the cold still present, dry, thin, without apology, and above it, the stars. Look up. At this altitude, on a night with no cloud cover, the stars above the Simeon Plateau are not points of light scattered across a dark field. They are a presence, dense, layered, so many of them, and so close to appearing solid that the dark between them feels like the exception, not the rule. This is the sky the scribes of this highland looked up at when they stepped outside their stone rooms at night. This is the sky the text is pointing toward when it describes the 9th week. The text says, "Them." And after this, in the 9th week, the righteous judgment shall be revealed to the whole world. Every work of the godless shall vanish from the whole earth, and the world shall be written down for destruction, and all mankind shall look to the path of uprightness. The righteous judgment revealed, not executed yet, not completed, revealed, made visible, shown to the whole world in a way that cannot be missed, cannot be reinterpreted, cannot be explained away by the institutions and councils and accommodations of the 7th week's long shadow. The 9th week is the week of revelation, not in the sense of a single apocalyptic event, but in the sense of a clarity that arrives and does not leave. What was hidden, shown, what was suppressed, surfaced, what was written in the margin and ignored for centuries, made legible to everyone. Now, the Ge'ez term for what is revealed in the 9th week, the word used in the Ge'ez for the judgment revealed in the 9th week, is din, in its simplest form. Din means verdict, decision, the thing that has been weighed, considered, and concluded. But in the Ethiopian Orthodox theological tradition, din carries a weight. The English word verdict does not fully hold. A verdict in the human legal sense can be appealed, can be overturned, can be reconsidered by a higher authority or a later court. Den, in the Ge'ez theological sense, cannot. Den is the judgment that arrives after all other judgments have been exhausted. It is the conclusion that was always going to be reached, the end point toward which all the previous weeks were always moving, finally made visible to the world that was always going to receive it. The word den appears throughout the Ethiopian Orthodox Psalter, in the prayers of intercession, in the liturgical language of the Tewahedo Church, in the daily offices chanted in the stone churches of Lalibela and Axum, and the island monasteries of Lake Tana, always carrying this sense of finality, not anger, not vengeance, finality, the settled conclusion of a case that has been building since the 2nd week, since the Watchers descended, since the Ielakan left their station, since the first corruption entered the human line, arriving now in the 9th week as revelation. What this shows tonight in the context of the 9th week. Den is not something that happens to the world from outside it. It is something that becomes visible within it. The text says, "The righteous judgment shall be revealed, not descended, not imposed, not dropped from above, onto an unsuspecting earth, revealed, as though it was always there, present in the structure of things from the 1st week onward, and the 9th week is simply the moment when the veil that kept it hidden is finally removed. What stays with me about Den? In the Ge'ez manuscripts of the 9th week passage, the word appears without any marginal notation. No later hand added a clarification. No scribe felt the need to explain it, or expand it, or place a parallel reference beside it. It stands alone in the text, as though everyone who copied it understood immediately what it meant, as though Den required no elaboration, only acknowledgement. Now, the second part of the 9th week's description, every work of the godless shall vanish from the whole earth. Not every godless person, every work, the structures built in the service of apostasy, the institutions that preserved the shadow of the 7th week past its appointed end, the systems that kept the Ṣəllul, the darkness, in place soon after the elect had been chosen from within it. All of it, the text says, vanishes. Not violently, not through conquest or catastrophe or the kind of dramatic ending that announces itself with fire and noise. Vanishes, the way a shadow vanishes when the light that was being blocked finally moves into the open, not destroyed, simply no longer present. And then the third part of the 9th week, the part that most readers move past too quickly, and the world shall be written down for destruction. Written down, not destroyed. Written down for it. There is a record being made. In the 9th week, a formal record, an inscription. The world, the present order, the structure of things as they currently exist, is being entered into a register. And that register is what the text, in its most literal Ge'ez reading, describes as being written in the stars. Look up again. The Simian plateau, midnight, the stars, dense and present, above the escarpment edge. The ancient world understood the stars as record keepers, not in the astrological sense, not as influences on human personality or fate, as witnesses, beings of light, assigned to observe the movement of the human story from their stations above it. The same root idea as the Ialakan count, the watchers who were assigned to observe and departed from their assignment. In the 2nd week, the stars did not depart. They remained. They observed. They recorded. And in the 9th week, what they have been recording across all 7 previous weeks is finally written down in a form the whole world can read. Den, the verdict, inscribed above, visible below. Now, the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition's understanding of when the 9th week sits. On the timeline is where the account becomes most difficult to hold without feeling the weight of it personally, because the 9th week, by the Ge'ez calendar, by the Ethiopian chronological framework that the scribes who copied this text were working within, does not sit comfortably in the future. It sits at the edge of the present. Some within the tradition place us at the opening of the 9th week, at the moment when the den is beginning to be revealed, when the works of the godless are beginning their vanishing, when the world is being written down in the register above. Others place us between the 8th and 9th in the threshold, the boundary place, the moment when 1 week has not fully closed and the next has not fully opened. Both positions look at the same world, both use the same calendar, both read the same G's text, and both arrive at the same essential conclusion. We are not in the early weeks. We are not in the middle weeks. We are near the end of the count. And the end of the count, the 10th week, is not a destruction. It is a transformation. The first heaven passes away. A new one appears. The powers of the heavens shine forever. But before we go there, before we open the 10th week and read what the text says about the final era of the present order, there is a question the 9th week raises that I have not yet addressed, and it is the question that changes how all of this lands. The text says, all mankind shall look to the path of uprightness. All mankind, not the elect only, not the chosen line, not the communities that preserved the tradition through the long shadow of the 7th week. All mankind shall look to the path of uprightness in the 9th week after the den is revealed, quite after the works of the godless vanish, quite after the world is written down. Everyone looks. Not everyone walks the path, but everyone looks. There is a moment, the text is saying, when the clarity of what was always true becomes so visible that even those who spent the 7th week in its shadow cannot look away from it. That moment is the 9th week, and we, keeper of this hour, are standing somewhere very close to it. The 10th week is next, and what the text says about the final era, what the Ge'ez preserves, that other translations do not fully carry, is what this whole night has been moving toward. Come. The 10th week is the shortest description in the entire apocalypse of weeks. 6 weeks of history receive detailed description, buildings named, people identified, events placed precisely within their appointed era. The 10th week, the final week, the week toward which all 9 previous weeks have been moving, receives fewer words than almost any other. That is not an accident. The text says, Lim, and after this, in the 7th part of the 10th week, height, there shall be the great eternal judgment, in which he will execute vengeance among the angels, and the first heaven shall pass away, and a new heaven shall appear, and all the powers of the heavens shall give 7-fold light. The great eternal judgment, not the righteous judgment of the 9th week, which was revealed, made visible, shown to the whole world. The eternal judgment, the judgment that does not end when the week does, because there are no more weeks after the 10th. The calendar closes here. And what the text describes at the closing of the calendar is not the end of everything. It is the end of the present order and the appearance of a new one. The first heaven passes away, a new heaven appears, and all the powers of the heavens, stars, the Aphors, the angels, the beings of light, who remained at their stations through all 10 weeks, give sevenfold light, 7 times the light they currently give. What the present order holds dimly, the new order will hold fully. Now, the Gi's term for what passes away when the first heaven passes away. The word used in the Gi'ez for the aspect of the first heaven that passes away in the 10th week is Melka. Melka means image, form, the visible shape of a thing, the outward appearance that makes it recognizable to those who behold it. In the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition, Melka is also a specific liturgical genre, a form of devotional poetry in which the body of a saint is praised part by part, kaut, feature by feature, from head to foot. The Melka of Mary, the Melka of Gebra Menfes Kidus, the Melka of Tekla Haimano, each one a careful description of the visible form of the holy person being addressed. The Melka is the form that can be seen, named, addressed directly, and in the 10th week passage, it is the Melka of the first heaven, the visible form, the recognizable shape of the present order that passes away, not the heaven itself. In some readings of the Gi's tradition, its form, its present appearance, the way it currently presents itself to those who behold it. What this shows tonight in the context of the 10th week, the passing away of the first heaven is not, in the Ethiopian Orthodox reading, an annihilation. It is a transformation of form. The present Melka, the current visible shape of the order of things, gives way to a new Melka, a new form, a new appearance, something that has always been present beneath the surface of the current order, now finally visible in its full form. Not a replacement, a revelation. What stays with me about Melka? In the Ethiopian Orthodox manuscript tradition, the Melka poems are among the most carefully preserved texts in the entire liturgical canon. They are copied with particular attention to the exact form of each word, because the Melka is understood to be an address to the actual person, not merely a description of them. To name the form correctly is to reach the person. To describe the Melka accurately is to make contact with what the form contains. And in the 10th week, the form of the first heaven passes away, which means what the first heaven contained does not pass away with it. The form changes, the content remains, and in the new heaven, the new Melka, that content becomes sevenfold more visible than it was before. Now, the detail in the 10th week passage that most translations do not linger on, but the Gez text does. In the 7th part of the 10th week, the great eternal judgment does not fall at the beginning of the 10th week. It falls in the 7th part of it, the 7th part of the 10th week, which means the 10th week, like all the others, has interior structure, it has a beginning, count, a middle, and an end. And the great eternal judgment, the den that is no longer revealed, but executed, falls not at the start, not in the middle, but in the seventh part, the completion, the final seventh. The number that the Ethiopian tradition has always understood as the number of fullness, of completion, of the thing that has finally reached its appointed end. 7 days in the week of creation, sevenfold instruction to the elect at the close of the seventh week, sevenfold light given by the powers of heaven in the new order, and the great eternal judgment in the seventh part of the 10th week. The calendar is built on sevens, the way the highland plateau is built on stone, not as decoration, not as ornament, but as the structure that holds everything else up. Now, there is one more thing the 10th week passage contains, and it is the thing I want to leave with you before we move into the next section. He will execute vengeance among the angels. Among the angels. Not among humanity, not among nations, or governments, or the institutions. Of the seventh week's long shadow, among the angels, the great eternal judgment of the 10th week is directed first at a level above the human, at the beings who were assigned to watch over the human story from the second week onward, some of whom departed from their station, some of whom remained, all of whom are now brought into the final accounting, the calendar that began with Enoch, the man taken up, the witness shown the structure of the heavens, ends with judgment, executed in the heavens. What was corrupted at the heavenly level in the second week, the departure of the Lakan, the watchers who would not watch, is resolved at the heavenly level. In the 10th, the calendar is a circle, not a line moving from start to finish, a circle, beginning and end, touching the first corruption and the final judgment, occupying the same register, the same level of reality, the same heavenly space, above this plateau, above these stars, above the wind that has been crossing this escarpment all night. 10 weeks, written down, preserved, kept in one tradition when every other let it go. And now, in the next section, we are going to ask the question the calendar itself demands, not what the 10 weeks describe. How this calendar survived at all, which scribes kept it, which tradition protected it, which canon refused to let it go, when the councils of the 7th week were making their decisions about what the world was allowed to know. The survival of this text is not a footnote. It is itself a part of the calendar before the 9th century, before the great Islamic expansion reshaped the trade routes of the Red Sea basin, before the Crusades, before the Council of Trent, before the printing press, made the question of canon a matter that could be settled by volume of copies rather than by authority of tradition. Before all of that, there was a city in the northern highlands of Ethiopia that was one of the four great powers of the ancient world. Axum, the Axumite Empire, at its height between roughly the 1st and 7th centuries of the Common Era. Axum controlled trade routes connecting the Mediterranean world to the Indian Ocean. It minted its own coins. It built obelisks that still stand today, carved granite towers rising from the highland earth outside the city, where they were placed 17 centuries ago. And in the 4th century of the Common Era, in the same century that the Roman Empire was making its own decisions about what Christianity would look like and which texts it would carry, Axum became one of the first Christian kingdoms in the world, not by conquest, not by imperial decree, through a man named Frumentius, a young scholar from Tyre on the coast of what is now Lebanon, who arrived in Axum as a shipwreck survivor and stayed to become the first bishop of the Ethiopian Church, consecrated by Athanasius of Alexandria, appointed to a kingdom that was already ancient, when Rome was still learning what it meant to be Christian. And it was in Axum, in the scriptoria of this highland city, in the stone rooms where the first Ge'ez translations of the sacred texts were made, that the Book of Enoch was translated into its first surviving complete form, not summarized, not excerpted, not preserved in fragments, the way the Aramaic pieces were preserved at Qumran. Translated in full, all 108 chapters, including the Apocalypse of Weeks, including the 10th week, including the Melka of the first heaven passing away. The translation happened between roughly the 4th and 6th centuries, the work of the 9 saints. The group of missionary scholars who came to Ethiopia from the broader Christian world and established the monastic tradition that would carry the Ethiopian Church through the centuries ahead. Their names are still remembered in the Ethiopian Orthodox Synaxarium, the calendar of saints chanted in the stone churches on their feast days to this hour. Arigawi, Pantelewan, Gerima, Aftsa, Guba, Aleph, Yamata, Likanos, Sephma, 9 men, 9 monastic foundations scattered across the Ethiopian highland. And in the libraries they established, in the manuscript traditions they began, the Book of Enoch was copied, and copied again, and carried forward into the canon of the church they were building. Now, the G's term for what they were transmitting when they copied this text. The word used in the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition for the living inheritance of the faith, for the specific thing that passes from generation to generation through the hands of scribes and the voices of chant and the careful repetition of text copied faithfully across 16 centuries, is Haimano. Haimano means faith, but not faith in the abstract sense, not belief held privately inside an individual mind. Haimano is the living tradition, the inherited practice, the specific way a community holds what it has received. not as doctrine frozen in a creed, but as something breathed and chanted and copied and carried from one generation to the next without interruption. The word appears throughout the Ge'ez liturgical tradition, in the synaxarium, in the daily offices, in the titles of theological treatises, produced in the highland monasteries of Debre Damo and Debre Libanos and Lalibela, always carrying this sense of living transmission. Not a document, not an archive, a living thing that dies if it is not passed on. The Book of Enoch, in the Ethiopian Orthodox understanding, was not preserved as a historical curiosity. It was preserved as haimeno, as a living part of the tradition, as necessary to the full understanding of what the faith held, as any other canonical text. What this shows tonight in the context of the manuscript trail. The survival of the apocalypse of weeks was not passive. It was not the survival of something left in a cave and forgotten, the way the Dead Sea Scrolls fragments survived at Qumran through the accident of a dry cliff and a sealed jar. It was active, intentional, the result of a tradition that understood what it was keeping and kept it deliberately, generation after generation, scribe after scribe, caint, monastery after monastery, because it understood that a calendar of ages is more necessary the closer you get to the ages it describes. What stays with me about haimeno? The word contains, within its root structure, the idea of something that is both believed and practiced, both held internally and expressed externally. Haimenot cannot exist only in the mind. It must be enacted, carried, transmitted. A faith kept only in private is not, in the Ethiopian understanding, fully haimeno. It becomes haimeno when it is passed on, which means every scribe who copied the Book of Enoch in every monastery, in every stone room, in every lamplight hour across 16 centuries was not merely preserving a text. They were enacting haimeno. They were being the chain. Now, the specific route the manuscript took from Axum, the city of the obelisks, the first Christian kingdom, the place of the first Ge'ez translation. The text moved into the monastic network established by the 9 saints from the early monasteries of the northern highlands. Debre Damo, built on a flat-topped cliff, accessible only by rope, the text moved into the expanding tradition of the Ethiopian Church as it grew southward through the highland plateau. By the 12th century, when King Lalibela was carving his 11 churches directly into the living rock of the Lasta Highlands, the manuscript tradition of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church was already centuries old, already established, already copying, already carrying the Book of Enoch as canonical scripture in a world where every other Christian tradition had either never had it or had already let it go. By the 14th century, when the Kebra Nagast was compiled in its present form, when the Ethiopian royal tradition articulated its full theological identity as the inheritor of the Solomonic line. The Apocalypse of Weeks was already old scripture in this tradition. Not new, not rediscovered. Old, worn by use. Familiar to the monks who chanted it, the scribes who copied it, the priests who taught from it. In the stone churches of the highland. And when the European world finally encountered this tradition, when the Scottish explorer James Bruce brought 3 copies of the G's Book of Enoch back to Europe in 1773, the scholarly world did not know what to do with it, because the text they were holding was not a fragment, not a partial survival. It was the complete Book of Enoch, all 108 chapters, the Apocalypse of Weeks intact, the 10th week present, the Melka of the first heaven still in its place at the end of the calendar, copied by hand, in gaze, in a tradition that had never stopped, treating it as scripture. The rest of the world had spent 15 centuries without it. Ethiopia had spent those same 15 centuries with it, reading it, chanting it, copying it, teaching from it, keeping the count. And that raises the question the next section is going to sit inside. If the Ethiopian tradition kept this text deliberately, actively as Haimano, then what happened everywhere else? What decision was made? By whom? In which room? In which year? That removed this calendar from the libraries of almost every other Christian community on earth? That question has an answer, a specific answer, a specific room, a specific year .363 of the Common Era. The city of Laodicea, Western Asia Minor, what is now. The Denizli province of modern Turkey, a council of bishops gathered in that city to settle several questions that the growing Christian church had not yet resolved cleanly. Questions of practice, questions of observance, questions of which texts could be read aloud in the churches and which could not. 60 canons were produced by the Council of Laodicea. Most of them dealt with church discipline. Who could marry whom? Which days required fasting? How clergy should conduct themselves in specific situations. But Canon 60, the final canon, the one that closed the council's work, dealt with texts. It produced a list, a specific list of books that were permitted to be read in the churches. And the Book of Enoch was not on it, not excluded by name, not singled out, not argued against in any surviving record of the council's deliberations, simply not listed. The list ended, and the Book of Enoch was on the other side of it. Outside, not heresy, not condemned, simply no longer inside the boundary the council had drawn, and that boundary in a tradition where the authority of councils carried the weight of settled decision was enough. The Book of Enoch began its long disappearance from the libraries of the Christian West. Not immediately, not all at once. Gradually, the way eras end. copied less frequently, referenced less often, moved from the main shelf to the secondary shelf, to the archive room, to the room no one was sure what to do with, until finally, by the early medieval period, it had effectively vanished from the libraries of the Latin West, the Greek East, the Syriac tradition, the Armenian Church, all of them gone, except one. In the same 4th century, the same 100 years in which the Council of Laodicea was drawing its boundary, Frumentius was arriving in Axum, the first bishop of the Ethiopian Church, was being consecrated by Athanasius of Alexandria. The 9 saints, or the generation that would produce them, were beginning the work of translating the sacred texts into Ge'ez. 2 traditions, 1 century, 2 different decisions about what to keep. Laodicea drew its boundary. Axum drew a different one, and the line that Axum drew, the boundary of the Ethiopian Orthodox canon, included the Book of Enoch. Now, the Ge'ez term for the boundary itself, the word used in the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition for the canonical boundary, for the rule that determines what is inside the tradition and what is outside it, is canon, borrowed from the Greek canon, rule, measuring rod, the straight edge, against which other things are measured, but carrying in its guise, usage, a weight the Greek original does not fully hold. In the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition, canon is not only a list of permitted texts, it is the living rule of the community, the full structure of its practice, its calendar, its liturgy, its texts, its theology. The canon of the Ethiopian Church is broader than the canon of almost any other Christian tradition. 81 books in the Ethiopian Orthodox Biblical Canon, compared to the 66 of most Protestant traditions, the 73 of the Roman Catholic, 81, including the Book of Enoch, including the Book of Jubilees, including texts that the rest of the Christian world classified as apocryphal, outside the boundary, and set aside. The Ethiopian canon did not set them aside. It held them inside the boundary and kept them there through every century that followed. What this shows tonight, in the context of the council and the calendar, the survival of the apocalypse of weeks is directly connected to the breadth of the Ethiopian canon. A narrower canon would not have kept it. A tradition that deferred to the councils of Laodicea and Carthage and the later decisions of Rome and Constantinople would have let it go, the way every other tradition that deferred to those councils let it go. The Ethiopian Church did not defer, not out of defiance, not out of ignorance of what other traditions were deciding. Out of Haimano, out of the living tradition that had already received this text, Notu already incorporated it, Notu already understood it as part of the full account, and saw no reason to remove what had always been there. What stays with me about canon? The Ethiopian Orthodox Church did not produce a formal defense of its broader canon in response to the councils that drew narrower lines. It did not convene a counter-council. It did not publish a theological argument for the inclusion of the Book of Enoch. It simply continued, copying, chanting, teaching, keeping the canon it had always kept, while the rest of the world drew its boundary somewhere else. The absence of argument is itself significant. A tradition that needs to defend what it keeps is a tradition under pressure to narrow. A tradition that simply continues without defending because the question of whether to narrow never seriously arose, is a tradition whose canon was never in doubt. Now, the Council of Laodicea was not the only moment of narrowing. 34 years later, in 397 of the Common Era, the Council of Carthage produced its own canonical list, a list that would become the foundation of the Western Christian biblical canon, ratified, revised, and eventually formalized by the authority of Rome. The Book of Enoch was not on that list either. 2 councils, 2 lists, 2 moments in the same generation when the boundary was drawn without the apocalypse of weeks inside it, and the tradition that held the calendar, that kept the count, was on the far side of both councils. Geographically, politically, linguistically, the Ethiopian Church conducted its liturgy in Ge'ez, not Greek, not Latin, not the languages in which the councils, weary arguing, it operated under its own patriarch, initially connected to the See of Alexandria, but sufficiently distant, sufficiently established in its own practice to maintain a canon that the councils of the West never formally addressed. The councils of Laodicea and Carthage did not remove the Book of Enoch from the Ethiopian canon. They simply never included it in the list they were making. And the Ethiopian canon was not the list they were making. It was a different list, drawn by a different tradition, in a different language, on a different highland. And that difference, that specific geographic and linguistic and ecclesiastical distance, is what saved the calendar. Not accident, not oversight. Distance and Haimano, and a canon that was broad enough to hold what the narrower ones could not. Now, we have walked the full trail from the 2nd century BCE, when the Apocalypse of Weeks was first composed, to the 4th century CEE, when it was translated into Ge'ez in the scriptoria of Axum, to the councils of 363 and 397, when the rest of the world drew its boundary elsewhere, to the 9 saints and the monasteries of the highland, to the 14th century Debre Nagast, and the full articulation of the Ethiopian canonical identity, to the 16th century, and the rock-hewn churches of Lalibela still chanting this text, to 1773, and James Bruce carrying 3 G's manuscripts across the Mediterranean to a world that had forgotten what it was holding to tonight. This plateau, this cold, this wind, these stars, and this calendar open in the hands of whoever stayed, gnawed enough tonight to receive it. There is one section left before the descent. We began this night at the end of the count, standing in the 9th week, looking at where we are on the ancient map before the night closes. We need to return there, back to the plateau, back to the stars, back to the specific week that contains us, and stand inside it one more time with everything we now know about what came before it, because the 9th week looks different now than it did at the opening of this account. It looked like a location then. Now it looks like what it actually is. A responsibility? Come back to the plateau, the Simian escarpment, northern Ethiopia, midnight. The wind is still here, the same low continuous note it has been making all night. Across the stone, through the grass, over the edge, of the escarpment, and down into the dark valley below. The stars are still here, dense, present. The vault above this plateau, unchanged from the hour we arrived. But we are not the same as when we arrived. We were carrying a question then. Where are we? On the calendar. We are carrying an answer now, or something close to one. Close enough that the stars above this plateau look different than they did at the opening of this account. They looked like stars then. Now they look like what the 9th week says they are. Witnesses, record keepers, the surface on which the den, the verdict, the final settled conclusion of the long account is being written. Now, let me place the full weight of the 9th week in your hands, not as information, not as content, not as something to be examined from a careful distance, but as location. This is where we are. The 9th week is not a future era we are moving toward by the Ethiopian calendar, by the Ge'ez chronological framework that the scribes who copied this text were working within, by the reckoning of the tradition that kept the count when no one else did. We are in it, or standing at its threshold, or standing in the final portion of the 8th, close enough to the 9th that the markers of the 9th are already visible from where we stand. The righteous judgment being revealed, the works of the godless beginning their vanishing, the world being written down in the register above all mankind, beginning to look, even those who spent the 7th week, in its deepest shadow, toward the path of uprightness. Look at the world you are living in, and tell me those markers are not visible. Tell me that the works built in the 7th week's shadow, the institutions that removed this calendar, the councils that drew the boundary without it, the traditions that spent 15 centuries without the Book of Enoch. Tell me those structures look as permanent tonight as they looked a generation ago. Something is shifting, not dramatically, not with fire and noise, the way eras shift, gradually, then suddenly, then, in retrospect, obviously, and you, keeper of this hour, ere awake in it, not by accident. The text says, the elect receive sevenfold instruction. The sevenfold instruction includes the knowledge of the calendar itself. You are holding the calendar tonight, in this hour, in the cold and wind of this highland that has been keeping this account since before your grandparents were born. That is not a small thing. Now, I want to stop for a moment and say something I have not said yet tonight. Something about what I cannot explain, because I have carried this calendar a long time. I have read the 10 weeks many times. I have stood in this specific section, the 9th week, the week of revealed judgment, the week in which all mankind looks toward the path of uprightness, and there is something in it I have never been able to resolve cleanly. The text says, every work of the godless shall vanish from the whole earth. Every work. And I know what I think that means. I know what the tradition says it means. But I also know that I am living in what the calendar says is the 9th week, or its threshold, and the works of the godless do not appear to be vanishing. Not yet, not in any way. I can measure from where I am standing on this plateau tonight, and I have sat with that gap between what the text says and what the world shows for a long time. I am not going to resolve it tonight. I do not think it can be resolved. From inside the week it is describing, the vanishing may not be visible to the ones living through it, the way the end of the 7th week was not visible to the generation. The 7th week, called apostate. Eras do not announce themselves. They simply shift, and maybe that is enough to hold tonight. Not certainty, orientation, the knowledge of where we are on the map, even if the map does not tell us exactly what day it is, exactly what hour, exactly how much of the 9th week remains before the 10th. The map tells us which week, and which week is more than most people carrying this calendar tonight ever expected to know. Now, look up one more time. The Simian Plateau, midnight, the stars writing their record above this highland. In the cold, clear air of an Ethiopian night that has been here, Mond Tard, before this account began, and will be here Tard after. The voice carrying it has gone quiet. The calendar is in your hands. The 9th week is around you. The 10th is ahead. How far ahead? I cannot tell you, but the count is known. The weeks are named. The tradition that preserved them is still here. On this highland, in these stone churches, in the mouths of the monks who chant the Ge'ez before sunrise on the island monasteries of Lake Tana. Still keeping the count, still holding the Haimano, still inside the canon that was broad enough to hold what needed holding. And now, the account is complete. What remains is only this: the plateau, the cold, the wind, the stars above the escarpment, doing what they have always done, recording, holding, witnessing, holding the long account, in the only register that was never closed. And you, keeper of this hour, allowed, finally, to simply be here, in the week you are in, on the plateau you are on, under the stars that are writing what they have always been writing. Whether you were watching or not, tonight you were watching. That is enough. The last reed has been set down. The last reed has been set down. Not put away, not stored, set down on the low wooden surface beside the open manuscript, beside the lamp that has been burning since before this account began, and is burning still, lower now, the oil nearly gone, the flame reduced to something barely larger than the dark surrounding it. The ink on the final line is drying. The 10th week is written. The Melka of the first heaven is in its place at the end of the calendar. The count is complete, and the scribe who finished it, whoever he was, in whatever stone room, I kite, in whatever century, he set his reed down on the surface beside the open page, did not rise immediately. He sat, the way a person sits when they have finished, carrying something heavy, not because they are tired, not because they need rest, but because the carrying was the whole point. And now that it is done, the body does not know immediately what to do with the absence of the weight. He sat, and the lamp burned lower, and the stone room held the cold, the way stone rooms on this highland have always held the cold, without complaint, without release, simply present. Around the small circle of warmth the lamp was still making. Outside, the Simian plateau, the escarpment edge, the wind, the stars, all of it continuing exactly as it was before the first word of the calendar was copied down. The account is finished. The scene is not. It continues now without the voice that has been carrying it into the cold, into the dark, into the wind, across the highland and the stars above it, and the long, still, unhurried silence of a plateau that has been here since before the first week began, and will be here when the 10th has finished. Follow it in. The cold arrives first, not as a new thing. It has been here all night, but now, without the account to move through, without the weeks to walk one by one, without the fragments to hold up to the lamp, the cold is simply present, the specific cold of high altitude after midnight, dry, clean, without moisture or weight, the kind of cold that does not press against you the way damp cold does. It simply occupies the air around you, the same air you are breathing, the same air. The wind is moving across the escarpment, present in it, the way altitude is present in everything here, not a condition, a quality, the particular quality of air that has never been below the cloud line, that has spent its entire existence at this elevation, moving across this stone, carrying nothing but itself. Breathe it slowly. Let the next breath be a little slower than the one before it, not forced, not controlled, simply allowed to find its own depth, the way the plateau finds its own level, the way the stone finds its own temperature after the sun has been gone long enough. Your breath knows how to do this without instruction. Let it. The stone underfoot on this highland is limestone, the pale, almost boneless color of old stone that has been here long enough to forget it was ever anything else. It holds the cold now the way it held the warmth in the late afternoon, without preference, without resistance, simply receiving what the air around it is giving. This is what the body does at this hour. Receives the warmth of the day, gone the effort of the waking hours, releasing the weight that the muscles have been holding since morning, beginning now its slow, successive letting go, not all at once, the way the plateau releases its warmth, one layer at a time, one held degree at a time, the whole structure of maintained heat surrendering slowly to the night that was always going to receive it. Your shoulders, that kind of releasing. Your hands, that kind of opening. The space behind your eyes, that kind of going still. The wind moves across the escarpment, that same low note, not a howl, not a whisper, the continuous, unresolved frequency of air, moving through stone at altitude. It has been making this sound since before the first week began. It will be making it when the 10th has finished. It does not know which week this is. It does not need to. The wind has no position on the calendar, only movement, only the low continuous note of itself, crossing the same stone it has always crossed, carrying nothing, depositing nothing, simply passing, the way wind passes, present for a moment, and then already somewhere else. Let your thoughts do that. Not held, not examined. Passing, the way the wind passes across this stone, present for a moment, then already somewhere else, then gone. Into the dark, beyond the escarpment edge, without leaving a mark, out, without asking permission, without needing to be remembered. The grass between the stones on this plateau is pale, the dry, high-altitude grass that grows where the soil is thin and the season is short, and the cold arrives early and stays long. It bends in the wind without resistance, not because it is weak, because bending is what it was built for. The root holds, the stem releases, the blade moves in whatever direction the wind is moving, then returns to its own upright when the wind passes. Not fighting, not surrendering, simply being what it is in the conditions. It has been given, the body knows how to do this too. The root holds, the breath, the slow pulse, the deep animal steadiness that does not require your attention to continue. The stem releases everything that was upright for the day, everything that held its position through the waking hours, everything that maintained its shape against the wind of the world outside, releasing now, bending into the dark that is waiting to receive it. The lamp in the stone room behind us has gone lower still. The circle of light it was making on the low wooden surface, the circle inside which the manuscript was visible, inside which the work of copying was possible, is smaller now. Half the size it was when the account began. The manuscript is still open. The final line is still there. The 10th week, okay, the Melka of the first heaven, the new heaven appearing, the sevenfold light, but the circle of visibility around it is contracting, the way all light contracts when the source is nearly spent, gently, without drama, the way sleep contracts the world, gently, without drama, the edges going first, the periphery softening, the details at the edge of the field, becoming less distinct, less present, less necessary, until only the center remains. And then, not even that. The cold, the wind, the pale grass bending, the lamp going lower, and above all of it, the stars. Still there, still dense, still present, the way they were present at the opening of this night, except that now there is no account left to pull the attention away from them. They are simply what is here, above the plateau, above the cold, above the wind, and the pale grass, and the contracting lamp, and the open manuscript, and the set-down reed, and the drying ink on the final line of the final week of the full appointed span. Above all of it, watching, recording, writing what they have always been writing in the only register that was never closed. You do not need to read it tonight. You do not need to understand it, or hold it, or carry it anywhere. From here, the stars do not need your attention to continue their work. They have been doing it since before the first week had a name. Let them do it now. Without you, let the wind cross the stone. Without you, let the lamp go lower. Without you, let the cold hold the plateau the way it has always held it, without asking you to do anything except be present inside it. You are present, that is enough. For now, that is everything. The stars are pressing closer, not moving. Stars do not move on a scale the human eye can measure in a single night, but pressing closer in the way that things press closer when the attention has stopped moving away from them, when the account is finished, when the weeks are walked, when the reed is down and the lamp is low, and there is nothing left to carry the attention from one fragment to the next. The stars are simply what is here, all of them. The dense ones at the center of the field, so close together, at this altitude that the dark between them feels like the exception. The single ones at the edge, further apart, more space between them, but no less present for the distance, and the ones at the very periphery of the field, the ones you can only see if you are not looking directly at them. Those ones, the ones that exist only in the corner of the vision, only in the soft, unfocused, peripheral seeing that the eye does when it is not trying. Look at those now, not directly, softly, the way the eye sees when it has stopped working, when it is simply open, receiving what is there without selecting, without focusing, without the effort of directed attention. This is how the Simian plateau looks to the monks of the highland monasteries when they step outside between the night offices, between compline and matins, the hours of deep night when the liturgical clock of the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition marks the space between the last prayer of the evening and the first prayer of the morning. They step outside into the cold. They stand on the stone. They look up at what is always there above this highland, the same stars that were there when Enoch was shown the calendar, when the 9 saints arrived in Axum, when the scribes of Debre Damo copied the 10th week by the light of oil lamps in stone rooms on flat-topped cliffs, accessible only by rope, the same stars, above the same plateau, in the same cold that has always been here. Your body is going still, not a commanded stillness, not the stillness of effort held of someone trying not to move, the stillness of something that has arrived at its resting place and recognized it, the specific stillness of a thing, set down in exactly the right spot, the way the reed was set down on the wooden surface beside the open manuscript, not carelessly, not forcefully, placed. Your body is being placed into its stillness now, one layer at a time. The surface layer first, the held tension at the skin, the slight readiness. The body keeps, even in repose, the low-level alertness that has been present since the account began, releasing, like the plateau, releasing its warmth, 1 degree, 1 layer, 1 held thing at a time. Then the layer beneath, the muscles that hold the waking posture, the ones that keep the head upright, the ones along the back and the shoulders and the length of the spine. Those two, releasing, not collapsing, releasing the way the grass releases its upright in the wind, and then, when the wind passes, returns not to effort but to rest. The upright that remains after release is not the upright of effort. It is the upright of a thing that simply is what it is, without needing to work at being it. The calendar is still in your hands. You can feel it, not as weight, not as burden, not as something requiring effort to hold, as presence. The specific presence of something that has been carried a long way by many hands, and has arrived, tonight, in yours. You do not need to grip it. The way Heimano, the living tradition, does not grip what it carries. It holds, which is different. Gripping requires effort, requires the continuous condition of force against the possibility of dropping. Holding is simply the condition of having received something and not yet passed it on. You are holding the calendar without gripping, without effort, the way the highland holds the stone churches, not by force, not by intention, simply by being. The ground they were built on. The wind crosses the escarpment, the same note, the same frequency, but slower now. Or the ear is slower, which amounts to the same thing. The sound the wind makes when the body is going still is not the same sound it makes when the body is alert. Same wind, same stone, same cold, different ear. An ear that is no longer listening for something, simply receiving what the air is carrying, the low continuous note of a plateau, doing what plateaus do at this hour, at this altitude, in this specific cold that has no name in any language but the language of direct experience. You are having that experience now. The stars above the Simian at this depth of night begin to do something they do not do. Earlier in the evening, they begin to feel less like objects in a field and more like the field itself. The distinction between the star and the space around it, that distinction softens, not because the stars have changed, because the eye has stopped working to distinguish them. It is simply looking, open, unfocus, receiving the whole field at once rather than one star at a time, and in that, soft, unfocused, receiving, seeing. The sky above the Simian does what the ancient word for heaven always meant it to do. It becomes a surface, a vault, a ceiling, with weight, with presence, with the specific quality of something that is not far away, but simply above. Close enough that the den being written in it is not distant, not a future event, in a place you cannot reach. Simply above, present, writing, and you on the stone below it, still. The breath is finding its own depth now. You can feel it, or perhaps you can no longer feel it distinctly, which is the same thing in the direction this night is moving. The breath that requires attention is the breath of effort, the breath that requires no attention, that continues without the participation of the waking mind. That is the breath of the body doing what it was made to do when the waking mind finally steps back. Step back. The breath knows what to do without you. The plateau knows what to do without you. The stars now what to do without you. The calendar, the 10 weeks, the Ämät, the appointed times, the count that was kept when no one else was keeping it, knows what to do without you. It has always known. That is what Ämät means, the living tradition that continues, whether or not any single person is attending to it. It was being kept before you arrive tonight. It will be kept after you have gone sleep. You do not need to hold it up. It holds itself, the way the obelisks of Axum hold themselves. Not by effort, not by intention, not by the continuous application of force against the possibility of falling, but by being what they are, in the place they were set, on the ground that was always going to hold them. The cold, the wind, the pale grass, bending without resistance. The lamp in the stone room, behind you, so low now. It is more the memory of a lamp than a lamp itself. The manuscript open, the final week present, the 10th week, in the only place it has ever been, at the end of the count, waiting as it has always waited, for the 7th part of itself to arrive, and above all of it, the stars, still writing, still recording, still present, in the vault above this plateau, the way they were present above every other plateau, every other stone room, every other lamp that has burned low at this hour on this highland, since the first scribe set his reed down and looked up through the doorway of his stone room and saw exactly what you are seeing now, the same stars, the same cold, the same going still.